I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Tatiana Mahmout. Tatiana really knows what it means to be at a product-led company. She not only was at AWS creating a product as a product leader, but she also was a GM for a product there, scaling it from 2 to 150-person team. She's also worked at some of the largest companies that are product-led, and she's started 2 successful consulting firms. With that, I'd like to give Tatiana a round of applause and welcome her to stage.
Thank you. Welcome. How many of you guys are not from the San Francisco Bay Area? You flew in here. Awesome. Welcome. You may feel like other people are talking to you like you've now arrived to the center of the universe. I do not think that. But welcome. It's great to have you guys here. And all of you guys, raise your hand if you manage a digital product directly. Okay, so not everyone. That's great. So I, as Tanner very nicely introduced me, I, as of a few months ago, was a GM at Amazon Web Services, joined AWS from Salesforce in order to build a brand new product, which is not yet on the market, so I can't tell you anything about it, but I can tell you a lot about the process of building products and creating new ideas at Amazon. At Salesforce, I built the IoT cloud, especially the front-end product experience, so all of front-end product management and user experience design. And then before that, led the Lightning experience redesign of Salesforce, kind of bringing everyone together to redesign the entire UI and the UX for Sales Cloud, and then it moved into Service Cloud and all the other clouds. And even before that, going way back, I ran a practice at IDEO, helping large companies really figure out how to be more human-centered in their product development, be more innovative in terms of bringing new kinds of ideas to market, and also at Leo Burnett in global advertising, which I'll actually talk a little bit about today as well. So this talk is organizing for customer centricity. I know we talked a lot about product centricity. I'm going to talk to you right now about customer centricity. So I'm going to ask you, setting this up, to think about, is there a common factor that separates successful from unsuccessful products? Like if we were to kind of go back and say, is there a principle by which we can say successful versus unsuccessful products have these things, have this thing in common? Okay, so I'm going to give you some options. Who thinks that successful products versus their competitors have better technology? And that's the common thing, better technology. Anybody? So I'm going to give you the example, right?
We guessed this example.
Of course, everybody uses this example because it's so obvious. The better technology was?
Beta.
Totally, and it was undisputed, right? Nobody disputed that that was better technology, and yet it lost. So better technology, not the thing that you're looking for as product people. Okay. How about being first to market? Go, go, go. Be first to market. Right? Who was first to market? VRBO. So it's clearly not being first. Being first is not the common factor. How about scale and resources? Having access to wider distribution, having access to more capital. Is that the key? Right. Exactly. Yeah, you're good. You should be giving this talk. Right, Walmart versus Amazon. Think back to 1999, right? Remember how amazingly huge Walmart was, and Walmart was taking the world, and we were all going to be slaves of Walmart? Right? Okay, so that's not the answer. So, what separates successful products from unsuccessful products? Does anyone have any thoughts? Oh, because you read the first slide. Look at you. So focusing on, I'm gonna talk to you today, and have you guys consider, right? Consider that focusing on customers above all else is the key to product success. And when I say above all else, I really mean above all else. Let's hear what Jeff Bezos has to say about how Amazon functions.
What Amazon is. Some people see you as an e-commerce company or a retailer. Others see you as an innovative tech company. You have Amazon Web Services, and you have original content, and you have Alexa, and so many other things. How should we be thinking about Amazon?
Yeah, I do get that is something that people get confused about sometimes. What is Amazon? We do such a diverse array of things, from producing original content at Amazon Studios to Amazon Web Services, where we sell startups and enterprises computing infrastructure, to the things that most people know about, which is our consumer offering, where we deliver things in little brown boxes. And these things seem so disparate. How is it that we're doing all of them? And the common thread, and really what it is it's an approach. We have a very distinctive approach that we have been honing and refining and thinking about for 22 years. And it's really just a few principles that we use as we go about these activities. At the very top of the list is one I've already mentioned, but you'll probably hear it 10 times throughout tonight because it's so central, and it is customer obsession. It's customer obsession instead of, for example, competitor obsession, or business model obsession, or product obsession, or technology obsession. There are many ways to center a business. And by the way, many of them can work. I know and have friends who lead very competitor-obsessed companies, and those companies can be successful. That's not a bad strategy. You have to be really good at close following. You identify winners when you watch your competitors very carefully. If they latch onto something that's working, you duplicate it as quickly as possible. It's a very good strategy in some ways because you don't have to go down blind alleys. If you're not pioneering, if you're only close following, it has some advantages. But it has some disadvantages too. And I like the customer obsession model. I think it's the right one. I think it's better than product obsession even. I think product obsession is not bad, but I think customer obsession gets you there in a healthier way.
Okay, so customer obsession is the key to Amazon's success, says its founder. So if customer obsession is the key, here's what product leaders do up and down the organization to create that customer obsession and ensure that customer obsession is the key thing that you are centering your strategy and your thinking around instead of competitor obsession, instead of technology obsession, instead of product obsession. Okay? So here's what product leaders can do. So the first thing that I just want to separate around talking about the role of product people is that as product leaders, we really play these two roles when it comes to product development. We are both responsible for identifying the right thing to build, as well as figuring out how to build it right. The figuring out how to build it right, we hear about over and over in terms of, build and test techniques, in terms of thinking about technical and organizational constraints, in terms of figuring out how to drive financial profitability and increased revenue growth, right? This is that figuring out how to build it right circle is the thing that probably as product people, we think about a lot of the time. And what I'm going to kind of ask us to do is to step back and say, how do we have a better discipline around identifying the right thing to build? And what are those principles and what are those practices that we are bringing to bear as product leaders in terms of identifying the compelling customer needs and habits, in terms of really thinking about not what our salespeople say our customers need today, but anticipating the needs of our customers in the future. And then, very importantly, as product people, advocating for the needs of customers as opposed to the opinions of our executives. These are the things that as product people, we really need to start to have a better discipline around, better principles around, and really understand that circle of first identifying what are the right things to build from a customer-centric lens. So when you organize for customer centricity, there are three broad aspects that I'm going to ask us to think about and to start to lead within your organization. As I talk about these things, I want you to think about where your organization is in terms of its level of both thinking about and its level of acting on these things to bring the customer into the room. So the first is process, then metrics, and then talent, or the types of people that are there in designing and building the products. All right, so the first one, process. And for process, center decisions around the customer. And we're going to go back to Amazon. Anybody know what this is an example of? Anybody know what this is an example of? Yes, that's right, the PRFAQ process. So Amazon has a company-wide process for product development called Working Backwards from the Customer. The most important, and it's a set of documents and a set of steps, right? The most important document in that working backwards process is the PRFAQ. So the reason why the press release was instituted, the PRFAQ, and what it really is, it's a point of view on the future from the customer's perspective. The reason why we are crafting a press release is to actually get into the mindset of what is the value that we're going to be delivering in the future if we build this thing, and why should customers care. Don't build anything if customers fundamentally won't care. It might make us feel good inside the company. It might make us feel like, we're gonna meet some sort of thing that our competitors have been doing, right? But if fundamentally it's not so compelling when you write it down for a press release that a customer will be reading in the future, probably we shouldn't fund it, probably we shouldn't build it. Now, when I first came to Amazon, one of my first tasks was to write a press release for this new product that we were going to build. And, I like writing from the point of view of the customer, and I was also, considered myself a very serious product executive, so we were not going into a space that was completely greenfield. There were already a lot of competitors in this space, and so, with one of my product managers, we did a whole competitor analysis, and we had this great benefits diagram of how we were going to excel in different areas of the product versus our competitors. And then I started to shop the PRFAQ around, or the press release around to long-term Amazonians. And all of them said exactly the same thing. That competitor thing, put that in the appendix. And I was like, but what do you mean? But this is really important because, there's already so many people doing kind of the same thing. And they were like, yeah, but that doesn't really belong in the press release. Put that in the appendix. And, I had a lot of anxiety about that because I was like, well, this is really important. If it's in the appendix, nobody will read it. Nobody really read it. But that's okay at Amazon, right? Like, that is what the press release discipline forces you to do. It forces you to make the decision that the point of view of the customer is way more important than anything else. And if you think something else is important, put it in the appendix, right? That's the kind of decision that this process forces on our product folks, right, at Amazon. And then the other thing to understand is that this process is all about what the customer will need in the future, not what the customer is saying they need in the present. And guess what most data and metrics tells you about? Right? Quantitative data. What people are currently feeling at best, but really it's what has already happened in the past, right? And so in an all-hands meeting this year, Jeff Bezos got the question of, what do we do when the anecdotes and the data conflict? And he said, when the anecdotes and the data conflict, trust the anecdotes. Because we are designing products to land for people in the future, not in the present and not in the past. And the only way to really understand what people are going to need in the future is to really get deep into understanding them through qualitative evidence, right, what he calls anecdotes, right, and a real deep empathy and understanding for where customers are going so we can best anticipate what types of products to build for them in the future, okay? When I was at Salesforce, we did a similar thing, and here's a process that we instituted about making sure that we were focused on customers in every decision. And I mean in every decision. Every engineering decision needed a customer story or a customer artifact to ground the decision process, right? So this was for the Lightning redesign, the largest redesign of the Salesforce product in its 15-year history. And what we did was we interviewed customers, we took photos of customers, we understood what they were doing, we took videos of them, and we brought these customers and their stories and their pictures into every meeting where every major decision needed to be made about prioritization, about which APIs to build first, about what kind of products and what kinds of designs we were going to build, right? Bring the customer into the room and make sure that every member of the team really understands and sees the customers that we're building for, and that includes the engineers. At AWS, I instituted a very similar thing where at every all hands, we had either a video or a very robust story with many, many pictures of the customers that we were building our product for. Right? So every engineering all hands was grounded and started with a customer story, a real customer, not one of these fake persona people, right, where you have some sort of stereotypical Jenny who's the admin and Bobby who's the engineer, but an actual real person who I see some people who maybe have an organization that does that. But no, actual real people and their lives and their needs and what kinds of pains is your product going to help them overcome, right? It's incredibly inspirational to your team, and it makes for much better decisions and much more aligned decisions. So bring the customer into the room in every decision. All right, so the second piece is metrics. So the next thing that we really have to think about is we're going to deliver what we measure. And so if we want to be customer-centric, we need to measure what matters to the customer, not to you, not to your boss, not to the CEO, to the customer.
Advise any entrepreneur or large business or large organization, like a government organization, is you need to identify your big ideas, and there should only be 2 or 3 of them. And then if a senior leader, the main job of a senior leader is to identify 2 or 3 important ideas and then to enforce great execution against those big ideas. And the good news is that the big ideas are usually incredibly easy to identify. You shouldn't need to think about them very much. You already know what they are. Let me give you an example. For Amazon, the consumer business, the 3 big ideas are low prices, fast delivery, and vast selection. You don't need, it's not the kind, the way you know that they're the big ideas is because they're so obvious. The big ideas should be obvious. And by the way, it's very hard to maintain a firm grasp of the obvious at all times. So little things can distract you from the obvious. But you have to back up and say, these are the 3 big ideas. How do we always deliver things a little faster? How do we always reduce our cost structure so that we can have prices that are a little lower? And the good thing about these big ideas is they will be stable in time. So I know for a fact that 10 years from now, customers are still going to like low prices. No matter what happens with technology and everything else, no matter what happens, people are going to like faster delivery. It is impossible for me to imagine a scenario where 10 years from now, a customer comes to me and says, Jeff, I love Amazon. I just wish you delivered a little more slowly. This is so inconceivable that you can have great conviction as a leader to continue to put energy into driving speed of delivery. And whatever you're, in AWS, I know that customers, they like low prices, they like availability, they don't want the services to be down, they like data security. It's not very hard to figure out what the big ideas are, and then you can keep putting energy into those things. And you spin up those flywheels, and they'll still be paying you dividends 10 years from now. And
Okay, so the piece there is you notice that Jeff, when he talks about the big ideas, he does not talk about the big ideas in terms of Amazon's business. He sees it from the point of view of the customer. I often hear people talk to me about the fact that Amazon is fundamentally a logistics company or is fundamentally about efficiency. I can tell you that this clip is very telling about the fact that efficiency only exists at Amazon if it serves the need of one of the big customer needs, right? Efficiency is only there because customers want faster delivery. How are we going to deliver faster for the customer? Well, you can write a PRFAQ to increase the efficiency that will get the products faster to the company. That will be approved. Or you can write a PRFAQ about drone delivery. That will also be approved. Is that more efficient? Probably not, right? But it serves the same core customer benefit. And that is what we all need to really understand, is what are the 2 to 3 really big customer needs that our product is delivering on, and there's only 2 to 3. I promise you, I've worked with a lot of very big, complex companies, and there's only 2 to 3, no matter where you are. And you define those 2 to 3, and you keep delivering on those, and they have to be defined from the point of view of the customer.
advise any.
Okay, so Intuit did a great job of this a few years ago, where they stepped back and they said, what are the 2 to 3 things that we're going to measure and make all of our businesses accountable to in terms of metrics? And how are we going to enforce that? So they came up with, and Brad Smith said this in an investor relations call. He announced it to all of the shareholders of Intuit, right? We will continue to develop innovative ways to deliver on our customer benefits of no work, more money, and complete confidence. That's it. That's what Intuit focuses on. And then they created a dashboard. Oh, wrong way. Sorry about that. I keep going there. They created a dashboard called the True North Dashboard. I've grayed out all of the relevant information. But what I want you to focus on is the fact that the dashboard is basically designed in order of priority: employees first, then customers, then partners, then shareholders. And on the customer category, it is consistent: more money, no work, complete confidence, and then there's the delight piece, right, which is more subjective. But those 3 consistent, from the point of view of the customer, benefits and needs that Intuit is delivering on across the organization and across their product lines, right? And they keep the teams laser focused on those 2 to 3 core customer benefits. Anybody here work at Intuit? Or has? Okay, does this ring true? Does this ring true? I'm not working anymore. Oh, you don't work there anymore. Okay. All right. So keep your metrics focused on what matters to your customers, not what matters to your business. That's the takeaway, right? Focus on what matters to your customers, and there's only 2 to 3. The third thing to focus on, and how product leaders need to kind of lean in to creating customer centricity, is something that I'm going to talk about, which is making the old new again, or going back to, remember the late 20th century? Who here remembers the late 20th century? Anybody? Was anybody else working in the late 20th century besides me? Okay. So back in the late 20th century, we had this thing called globalization. Does anybody remember globalization in the business world? There was all kinds of things in the 1990s about globalization, okay? And the big takeaway around that global revolution in terms of how products were run was that companies realized that when you have products being built by people in Western Europe or the United States for other places in the world, they were not global products. They were basically designed and built with the assumptions of people who basically had the mindsets of Americans and Western Europeans. And so what I'm going to say is that we need to make that mindset relevant for technical products, and especially as someone who works in Silicon Valley, I actually feel that we've lost the lessons that were learned by the globalization revolution, and we need to remember that global products require deep local experience, right? And this is where I think a lot of global products are really getting it wrong, or as they scale to large global numbers, we are seeing things that the product leaders never imagined. We never imagined people would use this platform to do bad things in other places in the world. We never imagined, right? Like, we never imagined that anybody could use this to suppress, women in other areas. We never imagined, right? That sort of whole refrain of never imagining comes from this deep provincialism, right? Especially in the tech world, especially technical products where almost all the leaders are from, maybe they weren't born in the United States or Western Europe, but they did their educations and spent their entire working careers in the United States and Western Europe. So we need to make what's old new again. So I worked with Procter & Gamble in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And what we did, I worked in Moscow, in the Moscow agency. I started the brand planning department for Leo Burnett Moscow. And what my job was to take global product strategies and translate them to the Russian local market. And it was really interesting what happened, and the things that we learned was it was very hard. Even when you're looking at great dashboards, right, in terms of what are people buying and what are the survey results of the consumer research from the consumers in Russia, it's really hard to understand and anticipate what Russian consumers are actually experiencing and what they will need in the future if you're not actually situated in the local context and solving the real business challenges there on the ground in Russia. So Tide, anybody here ever use Tide? Tide, familiar brand? Yes, Tide, okay. So you can see the two pictures. So the one on the right is the Tide that probably most of us in America are used to. You drive to Costco, you buy a 5-gallon thing of Tide, you put it in your SUV, you drive it home, you put it into your big-ass washing machine in your basement, and that's your experience of washing your clothes and using Tide. Well, guess what? That does not happen in Russia. First of all, people don't have big-ass SUVs. Many of them don't have washing machines. Many of them don't have the money to buy a 5-gallon thing of Tide, right? So you go from 5 gallons to 150 grams. Anybody know approximately how big 150 grams is? It's a cup. Okay, it's a 1-cup container. And the experience of washing is that people usually have a basin, right, and they hand wash. They might have a small washing machine, right, as well, or their neighbor might have one and they might borrow it, right? And so you really have to think about not just how do you repackage the products, but also what's the experience of the products, how do you market them, how do you sell them? They're sold in kiosks as opposed to in Costco, right? So all of these things you don't really understand and how the entire ecosystem works unless you're there situated on the ground and you have experience in that local marketplace. The other thing is Tampax. We launched Tampax, tampons, when I was there in Russia. And it was really interesting because nobody bought the first version of the Tampax tampons that we actually launched the cheaper ones, right? The cardboard applicators. You guys, you probably don't know what I'm talking about. You might have, girlfriends or women or in your lives. They're long, they're cardboard, and they're cheaper. They're cheaper. Nobody bought them because there's a huge social taboo around that large size. It was much more conspicuous, and so we only launched Compaq, when we actually launched, when we got into what was holding people back, right, and all the social stigma attached to it, we actually realized that the Russian market, even though the Compaq product was a much more expensive product to make and produce, that was the product that was appropriate for the Russian market. So the thing here is, for those of you who work in technology companies that claim to be global and have global reach and global scale, or for those of you who are in fast-scaling companies, technology companies, that aspire to say, oh, look at what global scale that we have, I'm going to say, live and work with the people who will use your products, do their jobs, and live in their homes. There is no substitute. No amount of consumer research, no amount of dashboards, no amount of anything will actually do the job of really understanding people by being there, doing their jobs, and living their lives. And you have to do that by being on the ground in those locations. Procter & Gamble did not allow people to get past a certain level in product management and brand management without going overseas to the developing world, for good reason. We have to put that discipline into technology companies as well. Thank you. Questions? Yeah. I think we have time for questions or arguments. I'm happy to have hecklers, actually. I love hecklers, yes. We have a heckler right over here in the blue, yes.
Not a heckler. I've spent most of my career actually doing and trying to implement kind of your kind of philosophy. So I kind of call it, community-focused marketing, because I focus on marketing. And a lot of what I found working in tech, and now I do consulting, so I get to work with a bunch of different kinds of companies and venture capital firms, is that they love the idea of that, but when it comes down to the numbers and the revenue, it's really hard for them to make that leap and be able to engage with it without seeing the numbers right at the beginning of the success of humanizing their brand by implementing what their customers want. So what kind of have you learned in the course of your career that has helped you kind of move forward and push these people to actually break out of their comfort zone and want to start and implement this in their own teams and in the larger company whole?
Right. So here's what I've learned. So I worked at IDEO for 7 years. I ran many global projects for very large companies. And they were basically two outcomes of IDEO projects that help companies, or were intended to make companies be more human-centered, right, and more innovative. The first, happy path was when the CEO was behind it, and the executive, and he got, or she got the executive team behind it, and there was a large transformation, and it was very painful. I'm not gonna it's always painful, right? People are always gonna be naysayers. But we go through a transformation. It takes at minimum 3 to 5 years for a large global enterprise to go through that. But if the CEO is behind it, and they take their executive team through the trials and the tribulations of that transformation, it can happen. And I've been there, helping steward, CEOs and executive teams through that with Light Technologies and with some other companies as well. The second version is that they're excited about it. They try it out, right? They might hire a consultant like an IDEO to do it, or they might hire someone internally or create a little team internally to do it, and then they play around with it, but they don't have the courage as leaders to stop doing what's been comfortable in the past. And then what happens is the great people leave that company, and I do not shed a tear, because those companies are meant to die. Companies are not people. I do not cry when they die. But life is too short, and if you are not getting the traction for your approach or for what you know will work, try to find something else. Yes. Oh, do we have another question somewhere? Oh, we're going to go here and then over there in the middle there. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. So I really enjoy your perspective about using real stories instead of like composite personas.
Yep.
What do you do if you're not the most powerful person in the room and you bring up one of those stories and somebody else says like, oh, I don't like that story, or that's not the right story?
Yeah. So I can talk a little bit more about why I hate fake people and stereotypes in conversations about products, but maybe that's for another time. So the most important thing when you're bringing up real people is that you have a framework around how you're bucketing your all the people that you've talked to, and you have a framework around where a particular story fits into the overall narrative of what you're trying to talk about. So at IDEO, we had a sampling technique for qualitative research, which was really about focusing on extremes. If you think about a bell curve, we would sample 1/3 extreme on one end of the bell curve, 1/3 extreme on the other end of the bell curve, and then 1/3 of our sample would be in the middle. And then when we would talk about an actual individual, we would know where to situate them in terms of their behaviors and their mental models, in terms of where they fit in terms of those extremes or in the center of the bell curve. So making sure that you understand the framework within which you're contextualizing the person that you're talking about. And then when you get a question, then you know who else to turn to or who else's story, right, to bring up in order to answer whatever objection you get. Well, that guy is just one guy and he's very different. And be like, oh, well, let me tell you about someone who may appear to be different in terms of their behaviors, but actually has the same underlying need or would actually benefit in the same way from the thing that I'm bringing up. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Next. Do you
Hi.
have any other? Yep.
You spoke of the importance of customer decisions coming out of a local perspective, and I want to caveat this by saying I agree, but in such a global digital world, local often becomes global. For example, the Burger King ad in Russia during the World Cup that offered Whoppers to any woman who was impregnated by a World Cup player, they then pulled that ad because the world was outraged at it as insensitive, even though the local Burger King store had done that as being acceptable within Russia. So the question is, how do you find the right balance?
Sure. So dealing with this in several different contexts, but especially in bringing global ads to Russia, you have to. Brand planning really didn't do its job very well there, to be quite honest, because what you're doing as a brand planner in that local context is you're trying to really take into account the global consistency and the global after effects to the brand, right? Because the brand equity is a global brand equity, right? But you're actually trying to create the particular product designs and the communications for that local market, right? So you want global consistency, right, with local relevance. And in brand planning, at least in advertising, which the Burger King ad you mentioned, right, actually didn't do a very good job at that. So yes, but that is actually the job of local brand planning to do and to have that global perspective as well. And there's a whole bunch of systems and processes that should have been in place to help mitigate that in terms of how you write the brand briefs and all that kind of stuff. Okay, anything else? Up here? Or somewhere else? Oh, over here, yes.
What do you do if your customer and your end users are not the same person? All of this is talking about focusing on customers, but if they're different people, how do you balance, is it you're still going after what your customers want when someone totally different is actually using your product?
Right.
Or do you have to keep them both happy?
So AWS and Salesforce both have this problem. At the end of the day, there are people. People are people are people. People are making decisions. By the way, companies don't buy products. People buy products, right? So regardless of that, but you have to think about, yes, who's buying and who's using, right? And really be clear about what pieces of the product you are designing to appeal to the end user in terms of being easy to use, and what aspects of the product you're designing for the cool demo that the CIO will love, right? So for example, right? So you are actually doing that portfolio approach across the product when you have different, buyers, users, influencers, and then there's also procurement and purchasing oftentimes, right, that you also have to appease, right? So yeah, you're looking at it from a portfolio approach, but the same thing still holds. It's customer-centric through the portfolio. And maybe one more question? Or?
Hi, thank you for sharing the PRFAQ process. I think most of us have heard about it, and I want to understand a little bit better on like what after that, meaning who makes a decision from a customer's perspective on that PRFAQ, and what if you have a room full of very like Silicon Valley centric point of view. And then how do you solve that problem? Meaning, like people think they are, they have the customer's perspective in the room of making decisions, but they actually don't.
So, I'm just going to go to my last slide here. Oh, okay. I don't think it goes back, but go talk to real customers. Bring those artifacts back, right? Because if it is when I manage, teams, people would often say, but I own this decision. And I would say, yes, but that person just came to me with the research. I don't care if she's 2 levels below you and she doesn't have the title, right? She brought me data. So when it's just 2 people's opinions, yes, your title trumps the other person's title, but the data always trumps the title. Right? So when you actually bring stories with artifacts about people, that is the thing that I have found, really stops people in their tracks to say, oh, maybe my assumptions weren't right. They do sometimes say, well, that's just one person, so then you pull out another one, and then you pull out the framework within which you've thought about all the stories that you're telling, right? And then it becomes much harder. Right, for them to think that their own experience is the customer's experience, right? Because I do see that a lot, right? Where executives say, well, I know our customers really well, I know what they want, this is what they want. The only thing the only arsenal you have is the real customer stories with the artifacts. Does that make sense? And then for the PRFAQ process, right, once that PRFAQ is approved, I can tell you about my experience only. I can't say this is a generalization across Amazon. It's really staying very focused on what is revised in the PRFAQ based on what customer data. Like, what signals are we getting from customers, or why have we evolved our thinking, and continuing to revise that press release and or those FAQs based on new information or new thinking or something like that, but always staying focused, right, on what are the signals we're getting from customers in those revisions of the document. So the PRFAQ is meant to be a living document. You are meant to revise it in light of new evidence, or in light of new thinking, or in light of whatever market signals, or new technology that we realized we could use, or those types of things. But staying focused on that customer is the thing that actually makes that revision process successful. Okay.
Will you all thank me and
Join me
in thanking, sorry, Tatiana. Great.
Thank you
so much.